record on this computer. Okay, welcome back to Political Economics, University of Pretoria. Let me share my screen, folks. Sharing my screen right now. Again, as last week, you can always, to ask questions, you can raise your hand or you can use the chat facility to ask questions. Political economics. So the general information I covered last week. We are still covering first part, pre-colonial history, state formation, and African development. And last week we saw the paper by Gianaioli and Reiner, which came out in the Journal of Economic Growth in 2007. And we also saw the paper by Michalopoulos and Papaiwanu, which came out in Econometrica 2013 about pre-colonial institutions. And today we are going to see a couple of other papers. We also saw last week, remember, folks, I covered with you what is expected from a referee report that is part of your assessment, and also what is expected from a research proposal that is also part of your assessment. So today we are going to see a couple of extra papers on the topic of state formation. And we are going to see the paper by Marcel Alsan, which came out in American Economic Review 2005 about the effect of the tsetse fly on African development. And we are also going to see the paper by Sanchez de la Sierra on the origins of the state, stationary bandits and taxation in Eastern Congo, which came out in JPE 2020. Okay. So let me go straight to the paper by Marcela. Okay. What is that? Okay, the annotated version of this paper is available from my website, as well as the other paper, as well as the general information about the course, and as well as the information about the research proposal and referee report. So let's go through this paper, folks. Again, this paper came out in the American Economic Review in 2015, and at the time, Marcela was I think she was at Stanford. I'm not sure she is actually an economist. She is a medical doctor by training, but she does a lot of, or she does economics much better than a lot of economists. I think now she is at Harvard now. Okay. As I said, the paper came out in AER 2015. It's a very innovative paper. Title, let's do the usual stuff about not only about the contents of the paper, but also about the format of the paper, which is essentially what is expected from you when you write your master's dissertation or PhD paper, depending on what your degree is. The effect of the tsetse fly on African development. It's a very informative title, folks, because it talks about the effect of something on something else. Right, and all of you, I think the only one who was not born in Africa here is actually me. Most of you, I assume, are Africans by birth. Well, we are all Africans by birth at some point, right? But it's essentially a paper about African ecology. Right, and how the African ecology, which is very specific to Africa, the tsetse fly, might have affected what? Well, might have affected the development of agriculture, might have affected the development of agricultural surplus, and might have affected the development of state formation, because there is state formation when there is something to be, when there is a surplus to be taxed, right? So let's see what the abstract tells us. As I said last week, folks, a good abstract is short, to the point, and tells us the story of the paper, which is what is the research question of the paper, what are the data and methods used in the paper, and the results. Okay, so let's see what she comes up with. She writes there in the abstract what the paper is about. This paper tests the hypothesis the research question that the tsetse reduced the ability of Africans to generate an agricultural surplus historically. As I said at the very beginning, the tsetse affects the agricultural development and therefore the surplus. Ethnic groups inhabiting tsetse suitable areas, not all of Africa is plagued by tsetse, but some specific areas, and that's is what makes the paper interesting, right? Ethnic groups inhabiting tsetse suitable areas were less likely to use domesticated animals, right? Because the tsetse affects those particular animals which we domesticated for agricultural purposes, and the plow, which is an important historical technology used in agriculture. Less likely to be politically centralized. Well, one thing here follows from the other, right, folks? If there is no agricultural development or less agricultural development, that means that there is less agricultural surplus, and there is less to be taxed by prospective government. Therefore, there is less political centralization. And also had a lower population density. Population density is a proxy for development, right? Areas which are more developed, they have higher population density, right? Because those are areas which can support higher population density. One thing that I didn't highlight here because I assumed you know, but the tsetse fly is unique to Africa, right? Which is also interesting. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in the American continent. It doesn't happen in Southeast Asia. It doesn't happen in Europe. It doesn't happen in Australia, right? It is very much unique to Africa. And what else I found interesting? The evidence. What are the results? Comment on the results. The evidence suggests current economic performance. Again, this paper is very similar to the papers that we saw last week, and this paper follows from last week's papers, right? The evidence suggests, because the tsetse has been around for a long time, but she is interested in the effects historically of the fly on current economic performance. The evidence suggests that current economic performance is affected by the tsetse through the channel. So what is the channel of pre-colonial political centralization? We saw last week. That's why it's important, right? That you have a look at the papers that we saw last week and connect those papers with the papers that we are seeing this week, because they follow from each other. Okay. So the evidence suggests that the current economic performance is affected by the tsetse through the channel of pre-colonial political centralization. So again, we always go back to the pre-colonial centralization. Not all African societies, not all ethnic groups had political centralization, but some of them had, as we saw last week. And those who had political centralization during pre-colonial times, they do better in terms of development now. And this paper, this literature follows very much from that one, right? So areas affected or more affected by the tsetse, by the fly, they develop, again, less of an agricultural surplus, which also led to the situation of having less pre-colonial political centralization with effects, with contemporaneous effects on development. Let me stop sharing here. Questions at this point? All clear? Okay. If you have questions, you can use the chat facility, you can raise your hand, or you can use, I think that's it. So let me share again. Let me go back to the introduction of this paper. So we go straight to the introduction, folks, and what I found interesting in the very first paragraph of this paper is what she writes, that an important finding to emerge is that political centralization prior to colonization can explain a non-trivial, and it is a very much non-trivial amount of variation in African economic development today. And then there's the paper by James Fensky, but there are also the papers that we saw last week by Gianaioli and Reiner 2007, and Michalopoulos and Papaiouano 2013 in Econometrica. Okay. I wrote there last week's papers, political centralization, pre-colonial period, and current economic development. So it's going ahead with this paper, the channel, I think it is the second paragraph of the paper. Yes. However, an important and unique feature of African ecology that could, as I said, the fly is unique to Africa, right? Ecology that could have affected its ability to adopt technologies, agricultural productivity, population density, and institutional development, but that has yet to be examined empirically is the fly. So she is essentially telling us a little bit about the channel, about the economic channel behind the research question and the findings and the results. And also telling us that this is actually the first paper that is using information or data, in fact, about on the suitability or of the tsetse fly in different areas, not different countries, but different areas of Africa. So she is telling us that what is her contribution to this literature. Okay. And then she continues, economists, historians, and biologists have debated the role of the tsetse on African development by circumscribing the use of domesticated animals as a source of draft power and precluding the adoption of technologies complementary to draft power. The tsetse has been hypothesized to have hindered the ability of Africans to generate an agricultural surplus and transport goods over land easily, right? Again, it's the channel that I gave you at the very beginning, right? Some areas are more prone than others to have the fly, and the fly affects the development and quality of those domesticated animals that we use as a source of draft power. Right, and then one thing leads to the other, right, and it precludes the adoption of particular technologies complementary to draft power, such as the plow. Okay, and ultimately it affects negatively the development of agriculture, which is the very beginning of all development in human societies, and it affects negatively any agricultural surplus, and eventually it will also affect the development of state formation and pre-colonial institutions. Okay. And then I think this is the fourth paragraph. This paper is the first to investigate. So again, she's telling us that this is the first paper to actually investigate the possible effect of the fly on particular outcomes. The paper is the first to investigate whether the tsetse fly affected Africa's pre-colonial agricultural technologies, patterns of subsistence, population density. So those are all, again, technologies, right? You know, the technologies are the main determinant from, from Solow, from Romer, the technologies, even agricultural technologies, right? Also scientists start with agricultural technologies at some point. That the development of agricultural technology, that from Solow and from Romer, that technology is the driver of economic growth. So it affects pre-colonial agricultural technologies, patterns of subsistence, the surplus, the agricultural surplus, and obviously that the surplus affects population density, right? And if there is no surplus, there is less to be taxed, and therefore it also affects institutions. Okay. And then she highlights again that this particular fly is only found here in Africa. Okay, it's not found anywhere else. Okay, folks. Moving forward, a little bit of information about the data, and the data is quite innovative because it's the first time that she is the first one to use information on. She creates an index. We are going to see the index actually right now. She creates the TSI, which is the suitability index. And then she has this very nice regional variation of this index. So the exact functional forms relating tsetse birth and death rates to climate are derived from the experimental data using insect population growth modeling, gridded climate data, and geospatial software. The potentially steady state tsetse population. Steady state is always an important concept that comes from solo, right? We must in fact, right, understand what is the concept, what is the definition of anything that we call a steady state. Something in Solo and in Romer, we have a steady state output, but we can also have a steady state population. And in this case, she gets the steady state population of the fly. Then she gets the tsetse suitability index, which she calls TSI. So we are going to see in the regressions the TSI variable is the standardized value of this steady state population. The TSI is then linked to pre-colonial anthropological observations on African agricultural practices, institutions, and urbanization. So again, it's important that you have the two papers that we saw last week. Because she's also going to use Murdoch's ethnographic atlas to get her data. Okay, this is still the introduction. So she's telling us what this paper is about. She's telling us now some information about the data, and now she's going to tell us the method. She's going to use OLS regressions. Nothing fancy there. The fancy thing here really is the research question and the data that she put together. The regressions compare highly suitable areas to less suitable areas within Africa, within African regions, controlling separately for the individual factors in the TSI and their first order interaction. And then she goes on. Next thing is, well, after the research question, after the data, after how she goes about in terms of identification strategy, what is the next thing is essentially results. And that tsetse is estimated to have had substantial effects on pre-colonial Africa. Now she goes to the point. One standard deviation increase in the TSI. One standard deviation increase in the TSI. That's how she interprets the results, right, folks? Is associated with a 23 percentage point decrease in the likelihood an African ethnic group had large domesticated animals. 23%, 23 percentage point decrease in terms of having large domesticated animals, with all the consequences to agriculture and transportation, right? A 9 percentage point decrease in intensive cultivation and a 6 percentage point reduction in plow use. Again, plow is, historically speaking, in many different societies, has been an important agricultural technology. Moreover, a one standard deviation increase in the TSI is correlated with a significant reduction in historical population density, which is, again, a proxy for development. Motivated by the land abundance literature, two institutions are explored in the paper: political centralization and indigenous slavery. We are talking about the slavery. Next week, we are going to see the slave trade. But she is talking about indigenous slavery. She is not talking about European colonialism, which is associated with the slave trade. She is talking about indigenous slavery, right, which was prevalent in Africa well before colonialism. Motivated by the land, okay, we've done that. Two institutions are explored also in this paper: political centralization, that's something that we saw last week, and also indigenous slavery. And a one standard deviation increase in the TSI, or in the steady state of this population, is associated with a 10 percentage point increase in the likelihood that an ethnic group used the slaves or enslaved one ethnic group, enslaved another ethnic group, and an 8 percentage point decrease in the probability it was centralized. Okay, so again, the TSI index is associated with less political centralization, and therefore less colonial institutions, okay, pre-colonial institutions. Another important thing that we always put in our papers, and that you must put in yours when you write yours, is a limitation. One limitation of this study is that data on the distribution of the tsetse at a time before the pre-colonial period is unavailable, right? If such data, so she's got data from now. If such data were available, and if the observed historical tsetse measure had more explanatory power than the TSI in a regression that included both terms, this would further add to the validity of the index. So one limitation, but not a limitation that kills the paper, right? Because this is a fixed effect, right? The tsetse inhabited, we assume it's an assumption, the tsetse didn't migrate from one area to the other. So it's a fly, folks. A fly is not a human, right? We humans, we migrate, we adapt to different areas. The fly inhabits the same places historically. So it's a limitation, but it's not a great limitation. So which doesn't kill the paper. What else? Simulating historical African development under a lower burden of tsetse indicates, so a lower burden, that Africa would have been. So she's simulating. She's assuming at some point in the exercise that Africa wouldn't have this burden of the fly, right? So it's a sort of placebo exercise. Okay. Indicates that Africa would have been characterized by modest increase in intensive cultivation and political centralization. So without the fly, Africa would have experienced increase in agricultural surplus and also pre-colonial political centralization. The finding is consistent with archaeological evidence of more advanced civilizations supported by intensive agricultural systems in place where the fly couldn't survive, such as the Great Zimbabwe, right? The old Great Zimbabwe, because of the altitude. So the Great Zimbabwe is less suitable to the fly. Results, the evidence suggests that the relationship between the TSI, remember the TSI is the index, the set suitability index, and satellite lights, remember also satellite lights we saw last week, a paper by Michalopoulos and Papaioannou, is a lights is also a proxy for, instead of using GDP, sometimes we don't have information on GDP at the micro level. But we do have information about lights. So there is a question here. So the assumption of no tsetse fly in Africa is, yes, that's right, is a counterfactual. That's quite right. Okay, it's a placebo exercise or a counterfactual. Yes, good question. Satellite lights is driven by the tsetse effect on shaping historical institutions, particularly political centralization. What else? Okay, then we have it's a paper on Africa, not necessarily published in a mainstream economics journal, such as the American Economic Review. So she gives historical background. She actually knows quite a lot about African history, development, or in one word, background. You don't really need me to tell you about the role of livestock in development. There is a large literature on that, so let's scroll for the African development. I think it's a great section, but I'm more interested in showing you the actual structure of the paper, the research question, data and methods, and results. And then the history of Africa, I'm sure you know better than me and better than Marcela. She shows us a very interesting. She's essentially showing us the data, right? Some initial correlations, which are very important, which makes the case, because this is essentially in this picture in front of you, this plot in front of you is essentially motivating the paper and the importance of the paper, because she is showing us that the index, right, the size of the population of the fly correlates positively with suitability for rain-fed agriculture. So unfortunately for the African continent, the areas where there are more flies is also the areas which are more suitable for rain-fed agriculture. So that the fly wouldn't be a problem, right? If the fly was prevalent in poor areas in terms of agricultural suitability, it wouldn't affect a lot of the agricultural output in any way, right? But unfortunately for the continent, the fly is prevalent in more productive or in more suitable areas for rain-fed agriculture, and that is the killer, right, for the continent. And then there, I'm just repeating myself. She just explaining there the plot. The problem was especially acute, given that its ecological niche was in fertile areas in Africa, as can be seen in Figure 1 that we have just seen. The suitability of land for agriculture and the TSI are positively correlated. Okay. Personally, folks, I find this a very innovative paper. The two papers that we saw last week, all these papers are very innovative, right? Because they really show us, and I think that was my idea when I put this course together a couple of years ago, was really to show African students, you guys, what can be done in terms of understanding the development of the continent better and better, so that better and better policies can actually be designed and implemented with better outcomes. And then this is still, folks, the background, the background, African background, and a little bit on the political centralization in the fly. What do I write there? That's the mechanism. Pre-colonial, as we saw last week. Some micro regions, some areas, remember, these regions, they do not always, we saw the maps last week, right? We saw the data, especially in the second paper by Michalopoulos and Papaiwano. We saw that the ethnic boundaries of Africa do not always, they are not always the same as the political distribution that we have in Africa, right? So the borders were designed in a kind of artificial way, right, to satisfy the colonial powers of the 19th century. The European colonial powers of the 19th century, but those borders, they do not always respect the ethnic boundary existent in Africa. Okay, so which exists up to this day. Pre-colonial political centralization has previously been shown to be positively correlated with modern African development, and that she's essentially telling us the papers that we saw last week by Generale Reiner and Michalopoulos and Papaiwano. Though the mechanisms which gave rise to heterogeneity in African political centralization are an active area of research. And this is it's a great literature to actually explore, especially in South Africa right now, because we had 3 or 4 weeks ago, we had those ethnic disturbances in the country, right? There are several ways that the tsetse fly could have affected centralization, and they are related to the purported role of the tsetse in shaping patterns of subsistence. Patterns of subsistence here is essentially agricultural development. If ethnic groups in tsetse-infested areas were more likely to rely on hunting and gathering, foraging, this would imply a fairly mobile society with almost no occupational choice. The only occupational choice in hunting and gathering societies is males hunt and females gather, right? That's what she's saying there. And foraging societies do not establish permanent settlements, right? They are always on the move. They are always looking for something to hunt and to gather. Rather, they function as isolated bands without authority above the local level, above the level of small bands of people, right? And therefore, they do not develop political centralization. It's obvious, right? One thing leads to the other. What else I found interesting when I was reading this paper? Okay, then she comes to data construction and the empirical framework. She explains how she gets the population growth model of the tsetse fly there. As I said, she's a medical doctor. They know how to do those things, but she explains, you can see familiar things there, right, folks, such as steady states and changes over time. We would call this capital accumulation equation, but she will call this something else in terms of because she's talking about the population, the tsetse population, right? But the concepts are the same. If you know Solo well, if you know Romer well, you will understand that. Okay, there is nothing fancy. There is nothing there that you shouldn't know by now. Okay. She shows some pictures there. Not going there. Again, nothing there that you shouldn't know. There we go. That's the data. That's the data. First, on the left, the tsetse suitability index, and panel A, tsetse suitability index, and then panel B, suitability for rain-fed agriculture. And she is essentially showing us now, but by using maps, right, that positive correlation that she showed us before. Okay, the black areas here, for instance, you can kind of quite clearly see Mozambique here, right? And you see here the DRC, which are the highest, which a lot of where the suitability index is very high. And then you can see that there is some correlation, right? The blacks on the panel B, the black areas are also, they sort of correlate suitability for rain-fed agriculture. They sort of correlate with the fly suitability index, right? And then she shows us, she's still showing us the data. She's showing us the weighted average pre-colonial outcomes by quartile of TSI. Again, the TSI is the suitability index. And panel A, we have, you see a high suitability index there to the right, right? And you can see low suitability index to the left, and then you can see that the blues are much higher on the left than on the right. The blues are the existence of large domesticated animals that we use for agriculture. And the greens are also much higher on the left, which are intensively cultivated. Okay. And panel B is you see, if we move to the right, where there is higher suitability, where the index is higher, we can see that the blue indigenous slavery is higher, and female participation in agriculture is also higher, right? Usually female participation in agriculture is higher in areas where societies do not use the plow. Okay. Now comes the area the part that I obviously I like most, which is the estimating equation. That's the identification strategy there, which she explains right here. So that's the regression she'll be running. The outcome, where outcome represents one of the pre-colonial outcomes associated with ethnic group J. So you can see that she'll be running cross-section OLS regressions. The vector X prime is there, denotes the set of climate variables comprising the TSI, and their first order interaction, as well as the proportion of land areas in the tropics, right? So very simple regressions she will she'll be running to get some info about African development. Results, folks. The tsetse prefer to feed on non-human animals. Luckily, they don't feed on us. But unfortunately, they feed on agricultural domesticated animals. And unlike wild game, livestock are not immune. So again, she starts this section of this paragraph by giving us some background information. Okay. The results, the first table of results is essentially the baseline results, and they usually, everything that comes after the table 1 of a paper are extensions or robustness tests. Okay, in here, every row is a regression, not every column. I'm trying to make sure that you understand what is going on here. And you can see that the TSI has a negative effect on large domesticated animals. The correlations there of the estimates are always negative and statistically significant. You see the 3 stars there, so they are statistically significant at 1% level. Intensive agriculture is also, it correlates negatively with TSI. The plow use also correlates negatively with the TSI. So intensive agriculture, plow use, that is the use of a particular technology. Female participation in agriculture, well, if plow use is correlates negatively, probably this variable here, female participation in agriculture, correlates positively with the TSI. Urbanization, again, urbanization is a proxy for development, right, folks? The most advanced societies in the world nowadays are all urban societies, okay? So it's a proxy for development, essentially. Urbanization correlates negatively with TSI. Institutions, indigenous slavery correlates positively with TSI, and political centralization correlates negatively with TSI, okay? And then she specifies there where when she includes climate controls, malaria controls, waterway controls, geography controls. Okay. Pretty straightforward, folks. She also tells us the method. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated. She's using OLS. Okay. What makes a paper is not complicated methods, folks. Okay, what else she does? More results, reduced farm estimates of the relationship between tsetse suitability and subsistence patterns within historical Africa. So the TSI now, each column is a regression, okay? And again, OLS estimates of equation, blah, blah, blah. Okay, results. TSI correlates negatively with husbandry. Correlates positive. Husbandry is a variable, it's an index, right, for agriculture. Negatively there, it correlates positively with hunting and gathering. And then those two are essentially zero. Agriculture and fishing are essentially zero. Okay. What else she puts there that I found interesting? Some robustness of the reduced form estimates of the TSI in historical African development. Again, large domesticated animals is always negative and significant. Intensive agriculture, she's just perturbing a little bit the index here, either to the left or to the right, to see if when she changes the size of the population of the fly, if the results change, right? But essentially, folks, if she changes a little bit, if the results are going to change or not, if she changes the steady state, you see, or the distribution of the population. But essentially, everything keeps more or less the same, folks. Plow use is still negative. Intensive agriculture is still negative against the TSI. Female participation in agriculture is positive. Urbanization is negative. Indigenous slavery is positive, and political centralization is negative. And then she runs a different regression, similar but different. Outcome identification strategy, where IJ Africa is a dummy variable for ethnic groups located within Africa. This approach, and let's go straight to the results to see. I think it's better to see the tables so that you can actually see what she's doing. There we go. That's the placebo exercise, or the counterfactual, table 5, that we're going to see in a few moments when we get down there. The first column shows results for similar areas, but outside Africa, right? So what she's going to do now is a placebo exercise. She's going to use data from similar areas outside Africa, but similar to those areas which are prevalent in terms of the fly. But those areas, although similar, they do not have the fly. Okay, because the fly is unique to Africa. Okay, so probably what she's expecting to get is a zero, is a non-statistically significant estimate, right? Let's go to table 5 to see the. I highlighted that because I think the placebo is something easy to do. It's clever. It shows that the person writing the paper is clever, because he or she, them, has actually been thinking about the problem, right? So you do not create a placebo out of thin air. And then that's it, right, folks? I just want this one. Column 1 is essentially large domesticated animals in other areas, similar areas, but without the fly, is essentially zero. Intensive agriculture is zero, and the plow use technology is actually positive. Female participation is zero. Indigenous slavery and centralization, all those variables are essentially zero. That's the map of the Great Zimbabwe that she uses. And then she continues, folks. Oh, yes, that's also important. Tsitsi and current development. Let's see what she does there. It's a table there with results. Let me see. Dependent variable is the log mean luminosity. Luminosity is a variable, is a proxy, right, for economic development. More developed areas are more luminous. CTC has a negative effect on that particular proxy for development. And then panel B, dependent variable is log number of cattle, and let's see, the TSI also has, obviously, right? That's what the paper is actually about, has a negative effect on the number of cattle. Let's see what else I found interesting. And that's it, folks. That's what I wanted to talk about this paper. The references, usual names are there: Acemoglu, Johnson, Robinson, Lezina, Giuliano, and Nathan Nunn. Now my Adobe has, obviously, this is a Universal Pretoria laptop, so from time to time it's okay, it's working again. Usual people on the reference lists: Ashraf and Galore, Banerjee, Jeffrey Sachs, people that William Easterly, Melissa Dell, James Fensky, Jared Diamond. And let me stop sharing and see if there are questions about this paper. Are there any questions? Questions, comments, suggestions? All clear about this paper?
Prof?
Yes, go ahead.
Hear me. The conclusion, is there anything that stands out there that makes it like a great conclusion?
I think her conclusion is quite short. She essentially she just rehashes the research question, data and methods, and results. There are no policy implications of this paper, although I think if you think hard, there are policy implications, right? And nowadays you can simply get rid of the fly. That's it. So that agricultural output can be increased. But a conclusion is essentially, folks, it's you repeat using a different tense of the English language your introduction, right? You recall, remind your reader what the research question is, data and methods that we have used, and the results that you have found. Any other question, comment, suggestion? Okay, if there are no questions, I suggest, because I suggest it's almost 10 o'clock, I suggest we have a short break, let's say 10-minute break for coffee, and then we come back and we discuss the second paper. And in the meantime, you can think about questions or any question that you'd like to ask about the two papers that we have seen last week and the paper that we have just seen now. Does it work? Shall we do that? Okay, let me stop recording. Let me pause recording. Okay, and I will share my screen and let's take a look at the second paper of today's lecture. Oh, by the way, folks, before we go to the second paper, this paper on the CTC Fly by Marcel Olson, the data of this paper is obviously available from the American Economic Review website. So you can actually get the data. You have just to log into the American Economic Review website and find the paper there. And how do you do that? Well, you just press that little number there, which is the DOI of this paper, and you go straight to the paper's website at the American Economic Review website. And from there, you can probably, I am sure, because it's policy, you have to submit your data as well. You can actually find the data. You can now download the paper from there, and you can download probably the data as well. Okay, folks. I hope it helps. So you just press there, and that's your usual security message. So you go to the American Economic Association website. We are American Economic Review. The paper is there. You can download the PDF, the citation, additional materials, the online appendix, the data set, the disclosure statement. Everything is there. Okay. So now let me stop sharing this. Got a little bit confused here. Let me share this again. Okay. So let me go to the second paper of today's lecture. So today we are going to see the second paper is also a very innovative paper. A lot of work was put together in terms of collecting the data. And again, recall, the topic of this lecture is state formation. So the first paper was about state formation, but what the possible effect of a particular fly, which affects livestock, can have on agricultural development, agricultural surplus, and therefore on state formation, because when there is nothing to be taxed, if there is no surplus on anything, then there is no state formation, there is no government. And now we are going to see something, I still on state formation. I'm going to see this paper that came out in JP 2020 by Raul on the origins of the state, stationary bandits and taxation in Eastern Congo. So let me just organize my screen here. This paper came out in JP, Journal of Political Economy, which is the journal of the University of Chicago. You can download the paper from De La Sierra's webpage. Okay. And De La Sierra himself, he is at U Chicago, the Harris School of Public Policy at U Chicago. Let's check the abstract. What do I put there? The results from the very beginning, a positive demand shock. So what is this paper about? Well, let's see the abstract, and we're going to see what this paper is about. This paper is very much about supply and demand of something, right, folks? A positive demand shock for coltan. What is coltan? Well, coltan is a mineral which Sony uses to put PlayStations together. So it's a very valuable mineral which comes from the DRC. My phone is ringing. Give me 1 second here. Let me stop sharing. Oh, it's gone. I don't know this number. Maybe someone's selling funerals. I don't know. I just had COVID, so maybe they got to know that. So let me start sharing again. Where was I? Okay, so what is coltan? As I said, coltan is a mineral that is purchased by Sony because it is used to put PlayStations together. And it's a mineral it's a bulky mineral, so you cannot conceal in your pocket, right? It's a bulky mineral. They carry the mineral on their backs, whose bulk output is difficult to conceal. And that is very important, because always think in terms of mines in South Africa, right? What is the difference between the mines in South Africa and the diamonds in South Africa and the diamonds in Sierra Leone? Well, the main difference is how deep the diamonds are. because that determines who will mine the diamonds, right? If the diamonds are very deep, as in South Africa, the mines will be in the hands of large corporations because they are the ones with equipment to get down there, right? If they are not very deep, then we have Sierra Leone, right? So that is important, the nature of the mineral, where this mineral is, how deep it is, or how easy it is to conceal, right, for taxation and state formation. So that is the channel, right? So it's difficult to conceal. Coltan is difficult to conceal. It's a bulky mineral. Leads armed actors. Well, armed actors is another way of calling, let's call them armed actors in Eastern Congo. Why Eastern Congo? Because in Eastern Congo, there is essentially no government. The Congolese government lost control of areas in the Eastern Congo. To create, leads armed actors in Eastern Congo to create illicit customs taxation at coltan trading points or at the mines, at coltan mines, right? There they emerge as stationary bandits providing protection. So because coltan is a valuable mineral coming from the DRC, which companies use to do this or that, but essentially it's used for in PlayStations. I didn't know, folks, until I read this paper, what was the importance of coltan, because I never had a PlayStation in my life. When I was a kid, we didn't have, there was no Sony or PlayStations. And then once you get old, you are interested in different things. What is this thing again? Anyway, so where was I? So because it's a bulky mineral, these armed actors which will become stationary bandits, which will become government, right? All governments start as stationary bandits, taxing something, right? Well, they will become, they will emerge as government at the mine. They will station themselves at the mines of coltan because that is the trading point. Okay, people cannot conceal coltan, so those guys, the armed actors, they will station themselves at the mine, in front of the mines, in order to tax some surplus coming from the mines. Okay, now a different similar shock. So just it's important because the results, but using a different shock now. A similar shock for gold, which is a mineral that is easy to conceal, right? Because gold, you can actually, you don't put gold on your back, right? You conceal gold. A similar shock for gold, whose hard to find valuable output can be concealed from customs inspections. You can conceal gold, right? You can put in your socks, you can put in your underwear, you can do whatever, you can even eat gold, right? So it's easy to conceal. Whose hard to find valuable output can be concealed from customs inspections and leads armed actors to require working permits to work at gold mines and to introduce an illicit tax on food sales in the villages where the miners live, because it's difficult, it's easy to conceal. Therefore, they cannot. You can go to the mine, to the gold mine, and essentially tell whoever is in charge that you didn't find any gold, right? So you can conceal the gold, right? So if it is easy to conceal, it is difficult to tax. So, but the armed actors, they know that there is gold being mined, right? So what they are going to do is they are going to station themselves at the village where these people live, right? And they will tax different things, but at the village level, right? So the coltan story actually creates a resource curse. Okay. What else I found interesting? The findings suggest that the intuition, the mechanism, stationary bandits and state formation. The findings suggest that irrespective of their stated goals, armed actors may create, intensify, or disinvest in the essential functions of a state to better expropriate. Okay, folks. So this paper is a great paper. It's a great example of collecting a lot of data, of learning and of knowing and learning about Africa, and getting the idea of how stationary bandits emerge and why and how state formation actually takes place in areas where there is no government, right? And then you can think there are many areas in South Africa where there is very little government. There are some townships in South Africa with very little government, and even some villages in the interior of this country with very little government. Okay. Lots of ideas, folks. Lots of ideas for you to think about. Introduction, the question of the paper: when the state emerges, when do the essential functions of a state emerge? That is the main question of this paper, right? A bit on the data from the DRC since 1995 in 650 locations. As a foundation for this study, he assembles a yearly, an annual panel data set, so it's panel data, on the behavior of armed actors since 1995 in 650 locations of Eastern DRC, right? Why Eastern DRC? Because there is little government in there. The mechanism of the paper and of state formation, he suggests that if violent actors form monopolies of violence, right, armed groups, in order to tax, the choice to form a monopoly of violence in one location must depend on the potential tax revenues in such a location. That is how all governments in the universe have emerged, right? And that's something that we also discussed in the previous paper, right? If there is nothing to be taxed, if there is no surplus of anything, then there is no government, okay? But if there is something to be taxed, then something will arise. That's mechanism A. If production can easily be observed, such as coltan, a higher value of output increases the returns to create a monopoly of violence, or they are going to tax the output because it's easy to see, right? Coltan is easy to see, it's difficult to conceal, and provide protection in the location in which it is produced, the mines, the essential functions of a state. So they are going to station themselves at the mine level, and they are going to tax people at the mine level, right? And they are not going to create anything else. They are not going to provide security at the entrance of the mine, but that's it. On the other hand, mechanism B, instead, he says, if production cannot easily be observed, that's gold, right? Gold is easily concealed. A higher value of output, maybe there is a shock for gold, right? And thus a higher level of workers' incomes increases the returns to forming the essential functions of a state in the location where these people actually live, or in the village. And rather than tax output, they're not going to tax output because they cannot see the gold, they cannot see the output, right? Because in this case, gold is easily concealed. Tax consumption, and they are going to tax consumption of people. People have gold, they can conceal gold, but with gold, they are going to get income, some sort of income, and they are going to consume something. So they are going to tax consumption of people at the village level and create a fiscal administration. So in this case, an armed group will actually provide some sort of service to this society. In the previous case, they don't, right? The coltan shock, he exploits a positive demand shock for columbite tantalite, coltan, a bulky mineral whose output is easy to tax, difficult to conceal, easy to tax. And then he contrasts the gold shock. Note that both minerals have different characteristics. One is bulky, coltan, and the other one is easy to conceal, gold. So he contrasts the effect of such a shock to that of a positive demand shock for gold, whose output, easy to conceal, challenges the feasibility of taxing output. So if there is a shock, gold shock, they are not going to tax the output because the output is difficult to see, right? It's easily concealed. So they're going to tax consumption of those villages near gold mines, okay? Why the DRC? Because there are large parts of the country without government, therefore creating the incentive for armed actors or gangs to act. So the central government has lost direct control from vast areas of the East, allowing hundreds of armed actors as well as thousands of individuals affiliated to the Congolese army to engage in criminal activities since 1990, including the creation of illegal essential functions of a state, which they privately provide for profit. Okay. I hope that the idea of this paper is clear, and also possible new ideas for master's dissertations and PhD papers. What else I found interesting in the introduction? The results, the effect of a coltan shock, bulky state formation at the mines. So that's the results. In response to an increase in the price of coltan, armed actors create monopolies of violence. That is to say, i.e., they emerge as stationary bandits, create illegal customs to tax mining output. So they tax the output, not incomes, right? Because it's easier to tax output because they can actually see the output, and provide protection in the mines. They will be there, right? So they provide protection in the mines where coltan is produced, the production economies. However, and there is always a however, right, in science, in response to the positive demand shock for gold, the results again, the effect of a gold shock, easy to conceal state formation at the village level, whose production miners can easily conceal from customs inspections. Stationary bandits emerge not at the mines, but in the villages where miners' families live. The consumption economies support villages, and a system of working permits to tax labor, harder to enforce due to migration, emerged at the production economies. Okay. And the results at the village level, intensive margin and gold prices increase, state formation takes place. So let's see what he says. The third result is that the gold shock induces stationary bandits to intensify the essential functions of a state at the village level that they create. An intensive margin effect that parallels the trajectories of state formation in Europe. Again, the universe is pretty much the same, folks, right? There is very little that is special about Africa. Everything that happens in Africa has already happened somewhere else, right? To reduce avoidance and evasion of consumption tax in the gold support villages, additional taxes can be imposed and fiscal capacity can be created. So that's how governments or states are created. Indeed, in response to a higher gold price, the number of tax increases in the gold support villages, where stationary bandits are also more likely to run a fiscal and a judicial administration. So now at least you know how we call governments, right? Stationary bandits. Results when coltan price increase, state formation at the mines, but not at the village. So there is a sort of resource curse. The coltan price, however, induces an administrative resource curse because taxation is at the mine level. So there is no service provided at the village level. Okay. While the coltan shock leads stationary bandits to tax coltan trade through illegal customs at production sites, mines, it also leads them to dismantle their fiscal and judicial administration in the coltan support village. So there is no point in having any sort of fiscal or judicial administration in the village because coltan is not getting to the village. So they tax coltan at the mine because they can see, right? You don't have to wait until coltan gets to the village. You tax them at the source. Then again, just like the previous paper, they give some background on India, on the political in terms of state formation in the DRC, right? You don't need me to tell you those things. So what you need me for here, folks, is to get you through this paper in terms of the format of this paper. Literature review on state formation, also a bit on literature review with context. This paper has 117 pages, you can see there, right, folks? But it's not that long. So most of this paper is essentially appendices, okay, or robustness tests. So don't be, don't get too worried. Empirical strategy. Section describes the empirical strategy. Let's see the setting. I really want, he gives a lot of background about the DRC because it's essentially motivation. The data are very, data collection strategy and data. The data are very rich, folks. A lot of work, they put a lot of work to get this data. Actually, if you send this guy an email, he's always in the DRC collecting data, right? It takes ages to reply to an email because he's always in the DRC collecting his own data. And he's got funding, right? So he's got a team of people collecting data. He's got a number of other papers dealing with similar issues, but this was the first major paper that he published 2020, well, last year. The econometric strategy is here. There we go. The baseline specification, folks, is essentially YIT. It's a panel data. You can see it's a panel data by just looking at the notation. YJT he calls it, but there was JT there and IT there, so there is a typo somewhere there. Is a dummy for the extensive or intensive margin, right? Recall what an extensive and intensive margin is essentially where the effect takes place. That's the outcome variable, and then this is essentially the price of coltan in the United States and the price of gold in the United States. Why in the United States? Well, because that's what matters, right? They set the price. PGT US is the log of the price of coltan and gold at year T in the US market, right? But you're going to see they show at some point the data that the price of gold or coltan in the US is similar to the price of gold and coltan in the DRC. So the prices are the same. Let's see, folks, I want to show you, I think the tables are at the very end. Then I have to go a long way. Okay, the conclusion, I think the tables come right after the conclusion. The core of the paper is state formation, stationary bandits surplus to be expropriated or taxed. While they can use violence arbitrarily, armed actors often establish a monopoly of violence, depending on what is being taxed, right? Tax and provide protection. If there is a surplus, they can expropriate, creating essential functions of a state. But that depends on the sort of, in this case, in the DRC, on the mineral, on the characteristic of the mineral that they are taxing, right? There are two minerals at hand here. One is coltan, which is difficult to conceal. It's a bulky mineral, difficult to conceal. Therefore, they are going to tax people at the mines, right in front of the mines. If we are talking about gold, which is a mineral that is easy to conceal, right, they are going to create a sort of administrative infrastructure at the village level, and they are going to tax people in different ways. So they can, for instance, tax consumption, right? So for that, they have to create an actual infrastructure in order to tax people. Okay. At the mine level, they don't have to create much infrastructure, folks. They just wait for people to come out of the mine. So in the case of coltan, in this particular case of coltan, there is a resource curse in terms of coltan, but there is no resource curse in terms of gold, right? References, usual names, Asemog, Johnson, Robinson, they always come first because it's alphabetical. And it is alphabetical. You can see that's also a very important thing for you guys to learn. Names come in alphabetical order, right? Unfortunately, we are trying to recreate the wheel in South Africa where names do not come in alphabetical order. So names come in alphabetical order, whether you are a PhD student or not, names come in alphabetical order, Always. It's my job here is to introduce you to international standards, and names come in alphabetical order. Robert Bates also there, Paul Collier, usual names, Avner Greif, Tim Besley, Blattman. I don't know every single person, folks, but I can see the familiar names there. Gosman, Schleifer, Kalopoulos that we saw last week, Nathan Nunn, Mansour Olson, Piketty, all right, it's the Nobel laureate, himself, and even Trotsky is there. Bloody hell. Okay. Okay, let's see the plots and the tables, and then we stop for questions and comments and suggestions and ideas. That is the price of coltan. So he is essentially showing us the data, and you can see the shock, right? It's actually the shock took place, folks, right before Christmas in the year of 2000. There was a huge demand for coltan because there was huge. Sony was expecting a huge demand for PlayStation, because usually new models of PlayStation, at least at the time, they were released right before Christmas. And then there is it's not a shock as in the coltan and the price of gold in the US and the DRC, right? You can see also that since 9/11, the price of gold, since the beginning of this more systematic way of doing terrorism in the US and in Europe, the price of gold, because gold is something that, well, gold is gold, but you can see that since 9/11, the price of gold has been on the rise. Okay. Support village in the sample, so he is showing some, so this is Rwanda, Burundi, and then this is the DRC. This is the area where a lot of bad things happened in 1994 on this border here, right, folks? Because there was very little government, and there is still very little government as we speak. He keeps showing his data, a lot of plots in there. Okay. You can see explaining the rise of taxation, stationary bandits, and protection, and the mines, and that support village. You can see he's essentially, there is no analysis in there. He's just showing the data, just to make sure that the data is, that people believe his data set, because he's collecting his data set, right? And this is not a data set provided by the World Bank, for instance. So he has to show the data to make sure that people actually believe his data. Okay. Okay, that's what I am really interested in showing you. Table 1, explaining the rise of taxation, stationary bandits, and protection in the mines first, and then panel B in the support village. So in the mines, if the price of gold has essentially zero effect on a number of things, on a tax, custom tax, work permit, it's barely significant, stationary bandits, security service, and extensive index, right? But when we at the mines, remember the different characteristics between gold and coltan. Those are different minerals. One is bulky and the other one is not. The other one, gold, is easy to conceal. Recall, coltan is a bulky mineral, difficult to conceal. Activities in the mines increase. So activities in the mines, they do increase, right? Tax, any tax, custom tax, stationary bandits in front of the mines, security service, and extensive index. Okay. Panel B, that's why it's important when you get to the regressions, you know the mechanisms at work, you know what these papers are about, because then it's easy for you to understand and to make sense of the estimates, right? At support village level, then the story goes upside down. There are no attacks, but there are taxation. There is any tax, sales tax or tax on consumption, and there are security services, and there are stationary bandits. Coltan, on the other hand, it's essentially zero. Okay. And then again, who are the stationary bandits? He goes in quite some detail. It's really not what it's all. Everything here is very interesting, but it's not what I want to show you. I just want to introduce you to this, to the main regressions, to the main results that I find interesting. Lots of different results, but then you see it's only, in fact, it's only 42 pages, folks. Everything else is part of the appendix, and we are not going there. Let me stop sharing and questions, comments, suggestions, ideas. Okay, there is a question here. Let me see. Okay, it's a question not about the paper, but about assignment. Students are obsessed about assignments. The students should be obsessed about the content of what they have to write in the assignment. Proposal assigned last week, you said you still have to decide whether we should strictly focus on political economics or not when choosing our topics. Yes, I would like, because you see, folks, I was thinking about this morning. If you choose to do whatever you want, I'm not going to be familiar with the literature, right? So I think it's better if we stick to okay, let me go one. Okay, so let me go first, the first one here. So let's stick in terms of the proposal, Anneli. Let's stick with the idea of using papers that we are covering here, right? Because then I can actually mark, okay? Because then I'm familiar with the literature, okay? So the answer is we stick with political economics, okay? Let's see the next one. Prof, why would he not add the main results table in the paper, but in the appendix? No, I think the main results are in that table that that we covered, right? But then everything that is in the appendix are robustness tests, and he also shows the data and how he coded the data in a lot of detail. Because as I said, I think the main job here was he collected his own data. That's not a data set coming from the Penn World Table or from the IMF or from the World Bank. We tend to believe those off-the-shelf data sets, right? Because, well, who is going to say that the IMF is providing us with crappy data, right? So that's why his appendix is long, right? It's very long because he shows the data in quite some detail, and also not only the codes, the way he coded the data, but also the definitions of the data and how he collected the data, who collected the data, how the data was coded, etc., etc. Okay, so that's why the appendix is long. That's why. Let me see if there is something else. Okay, more questions, comments, suggestions, ideas? All reasonably clear, folks. That's the point. Is not that you know everything after the lecture, but that at least you have a vague idea of behind these papers. And oh, by the way, this paper also, the data is probably also available, right, from JP's website. All the major journals in economics, they ask people to, once the paper is accepted for publication, they ask people to provide the journal with the data set, so that people like us can actually replicate the results and see if the results are robust or not. Okay, that is for transparency in research. So because people cheat, okay, some people cheat. Questions, comments, suggestions? All clear? Questions about the format of the referee report and of the research proposal? So before we disappear then, let me share the screen again. Let me show you. So folks, I assume that most of you are either PhD students or master's students. For those, it doesn't matter whether you are a PhD or a master's student. I gave this course for honors students on research methods. So all the materials are available from the same page that you go for the Zoom link. And I think it can also be useful for you, because it, although honors students, the nature of the exercise they have to write, the long paper, right, is simpler, but the structure is the same. The format is the same as your master's dissertation, but you are going to use more sophisticated methods, and of your PhD paper, but you are going to use more sophisticated methods, right, or more intriguing research questions. Okay, but the structure, the format is the same. So I think perhaps there is some material there that you can download free of charge. Perhaps there is some material there that helps you, because there is also material not only about the structure and format of the paper, but also about a referee report and research proposals. Okay, so make use of the resources. And if you go to the tab resources, it's also, let me stop sharing. Okay, actually, I think you can see, right? I took this picture there also in Oxford. It's a nice bridge. There is also resources on bibliographical resources. There is access to JSTOR, the American Economics Association's Econolit. You can find a lot of papers there. RePack, Google Scholar, blah, blah, blah. Also data sets. Personally, those are mostly data aggregators, right? The one I like most is our world in data. You can get a lot of data from our world in data easily, even maps. They plot graphs for you, they plot maps for you. You don't need Matthew to do that for you anymore. Our world in data does that for free. So make use of the facilities, also data on econometrics and software. I think the one I like most is really the one from the Marginal Revolution University, Mastering Econometrics with Joshua Angrist from the MIT. There is a lot of information there, nice to watch videos with spot on to the point info on metrics. Growth and development, usual stuff. There is the blog by Paul Romer there, and then usual stuff from IMF and World Bank. Resources for graduate students, how to write a paper, how not to write a paper. The ones I like are essentially Cochrane's writing tips for PhD students. I think we saw a little bit on that last week. But Dave Levine's cheap advice is also very useful. And I think that's it, folks. Professional associations, the American Economic Association is the main professional association in our profession. Full of resources, full of papers there. Also make use of the facility, folks. Let me stop sharing. Any question or comment, suggestion, idea? All cool. So let me stop recording.